And so as was introduced, I lead the Africa Sandboxes Forum. The Datasphere Initiative does work under the Global Sandboxes Forum, but then different forums in Africa, in Latin America, Brazil, and the rest of the world. And so our work is largely around building a science and community around sandboxes. And my presentation today is largely going to be about sandboxes and how they can help with AI assurance. So our work falls under three areas really, which is research, capacity building, and outreach. And without getting much into details, really, you will see from the different tools and pieces that and reports and other pieces that I'm going to present, that our work falls under these three broad areas. So what are sandboxes? If you're here and you're hearing sandboxes for the first time, I wanted to start by not assuming that we all know what sandboxes are. At the Datasphere Initiative, we define them as time-bound collaborative environments that test innovative technologies and data practices against regulatory frameworks, or experiments with new uses, capabilities, and means of governing data. In a nutshell, we also categorize them in two ways, and a third one being a hybrid of these two. One being operational sandboxes, of which these handle data and their testing environments where hosted data can be accessed and used. Or regulatory sandboxes, where now we're looking at collaborative processes where regulators, service providers, and other relevant stakeholders test innovative technologies and data practices within a regulatory framework. So as I go through the presentation, you will notice that different cases that I'm referring to that are focusing on AI are either regulatory or they are operational sandboxes. So with a bit of a background, if you want to really delve deeper into what sandboxes are, we've written a number of reports around sandboxes for data and creating spaces for agile solutions across border was the first one. But most recently, we have written on sandboxes for AI. And then we also have a sandboxes outlook report for Africa that is looking at who is sandboxing in Africa, what are some of the things that they're experimenting with, and how does the landscape look like? So these are reports that can be found on our publications page, really, if you're interested in learning more about sandboxes. Just a moment, I change this setting so that you're not distracted. Okay, so the rest of the presentation is going to take up this brief shot. I will look at why sandboxes. Why are we looking at sandboxes as a tool for first of all, just experimenting with emerging technologies such as AI, testing against agile data governance approaches, really, which is different from the traditional way of governing technology. So we'll look at the why, then we'll get into sandboxes for AI, which should be the area that you're interested in, considering the topic of the summer school. Then I will share some examples from the sandboxes that we have mapped at the Datasphere Initiative. And eventually, if time allows, look into how and when to sandbox. So I would want to start the part of explaining why sandboxes by giving you a few scenarios. And let's read together. Don't try to go ahead of me. So a Ugandan agri-tech startup deploys an AI-powered app that uses farmers' mobile phone photos to detect crop pests. And these can be anything from, say, fall armyworm in maize to anything, say, in other types of plants. The risk is that the AI was trained mostly on Asian datasets. So when applied locally, it misclassified pests, leading farmers to buy unnecessary pesticides, apply wrong treatments. Had there been a sandbox, we would have been able, or at least the regulators it would have allowed all the people involved, not just the regulators. And the stakeholders in this case, we're looking at the solution providers, who is now the startup, or at least the software developers, who is the startup, then Ministry of Agriculture and farmer cooperatives. With a sandbox, they would have been able to test the model with local data sets, compare outputs, and involve agricultural experts to validate results before a mass rollout. So that's one of the scenarios where a sandbox could have been useful. let's look at another scenario, which is AI in digital lending. A digital lender uses AI to score borrowers using mobile money transaction histories. The risk here is the model systematically downgrades women and rural users who have irregular but trustworthy cash flow patterns, locking them out of loans. Had there been a use case of a sandbox, the sandbox would have created a space for testing where the lender, regulators, the sandbox would have brought together the lenders, regulators, and consumer rights groups, even consumers themselves, to evaluate the algorithm's fairness. Data and additionally, data anonymization would have protected borrowers' privacy, while bias detection tools flag discriminatory outcomes. So I am just painting a picture of how sandboxes could have brought in an element of accountability, fairness, and literally making the tools safer for the people. So at this point, if we are to answer the question of why sandboxing is important for AI assurance, we realize that among the things that it can do, it would allow pre-deployment stress testing for AI systems in real contexts, where solutions are tested in a controlled environment. Because remember, we define sandboxes as time-bound experimental spaces. So, but these are simulating real-world environments. So this level of testing, so that solutions don't go out to be unfair or harm users, is what sandboxes can help with AI-driven solutions. Then it would have helped to uncover hidden biases and inaccuracies, or even the as we have seen in the scenarios that are created. And finally, the sandboxes create a space for regulators, innovators, and civil society to co-design safeguards. Because once issues are identified, then the next level is to, come up with what are the safeguards, what are the guidelines, how can we make the systems more trustworthy and accountable. So sandboxing as a new mindset is why matters. Why? Because technology is advancing at a speed at which regulators cannot keep up. And sandboxes create an environment where the solution providers are learning from the regulators what the regulatory guidelines really are that they should be following, but also regulators are learning from the solution providers the new and emerging hidden biases, risks, and any inaccuracies that could be in some of these solutions that are being rolled out. So for now, we delve into a little bit of some of the sandboxes for AI that have been deployed, or at least that are being used across the world. And these you can read more in our sandboxes for AI reporters have already mentioned. What you see on the left is really the contents of that report. But to give you an overview, overall, we came across 66 sandboxes that are working or at least are focusing on AI and data at large. And what I'm going to take you through, the breakdown of the numbers that you're looking at is, different attributes, really, scope, focus, and all. So out of the 66, 59 are national. That means these are being run by countries, while 7 are global, regional, state level, or municipal level. Out of the 59 that are national, it's only 44 countries that have sandboxes focusing on AI and data globally. So that means some of these countries have more than one sandbox that is focusing on AI or data. But if we are to delve deeper to see which sandboxes are actually focusing on AI alone, then 31 out of the 59 national ones are focusing on AI innovation. And these are from 23 countries, as you can see on the other side of the visualization, or the last box. And this is the geographic distribution, really, where they are. As you can see, we have only one case in Africa, and that's the Communications Authority of Kenya's sandbox. And this sandbox is looking at everything emerging technology. So AI falls in that, but in Africa, we don't have any AI specific sandbox. But I want to go deep and sort of give a breakdown of, so this is just looking at the types as I've already explained. Most of them are regulatory sandboxes, very few are operational. And we also have cases of sandboxes that are both operational and regulatory. But I wanted to also delve deeper into the specifics of who is actually running these sandboxes. When we talk about sandboxes for AI, who is running these sandboxes? Who is, interested in the area of ensuring AI is accountable, is fair, and not harming people? So 8 of the sandboxes that we looked are being run by ministries of economic affairs, 6 by data protection authorities, 9 by ICT and innovation ministries, departments or agencies. And then we also have several examples of sectoral cases, and that's where those are cases where you find, say, a Ministry of Health somewhere is running a sandbox that is specifically testing AI-driven solutions to ascertain a number of things. And I will take you through examples where you get to see what are some of the things that people are testing in sandboxes when it comes to AI. So this is just a short breakdown of what kind of organizations or institutions are running sandboxes. But out of the 66 examples we came across, as you can see, I think actually these numbers are in percentage, not the account in particular. So some of the areas that they are focusing on when really assessing, when looking at sandboxes for AI, the first one is assessing emerging legal and technical issues relating to data protection and privacy. As you're aware, AI models are really powered by huge amounts of data. So what some of these sandboxes are doing is they are testing if they are testing data protection and privacy elements of these AI-driven solutions. Then also testing compliance with data regulations, which is related, but also these sandboxes are being used to identify and address trust issues. So any issues that are being raised by the public, then authorities are able to work with providers or developers to come up with safeguards, or at least to come up with explanations that make people start to trust systems. And then finally, as approaches and techniques in combating cyber threats, some of the uses of sandboxes in regards to AI. So why would AI sandboxes matter for a business? Because someone might be here and they're thinking maybe these matter a lot for regulators and not for business. But I hope that you've already identified that these sandboxes benefit both in a way. So first of all, systematic evaluation. I mean, creating safe environments to test AI before full deployment really is good and reduces the cost of failures. If a system, your AI-driven system fails, then of course that's going to be more costly than if, for example, you've already anticipated the risks and planned for them. But also trust building, like I already brought up in the previous point. So sandboxes help to solution providers, developers, entrepreneurs, and startups to demonstrate accountability and fairness and strengthen customer and investor confidence. And that sandboxes create an amazing environment for you to do that, because sandboxes are not only just for the regulator or the authority, say, for example, data protection authority and the solution provider. No, they are also open to civil society organizations, to academia, to all types of stakeholders to come together and ask questions that they think should be answered about some of these AI-driven solutions. It's also a way to mitigate risks and identify hidden biases, data gaps. As developers, sometimes we do not put ourselves in the shoes of the users. Or even when we do, we are not the final user. I remember when I was still actively developing software, I was more excited about having my code work. And I was always brought back to a point of, okay, think this works, but then put yourself in the shoes of the user how does it feel using this? What could be some of the consequences that are coming up? And it was always hard for me to figure those things out as a developer. But when we brought people into a room and did like an evaluation workshop and have people use the dashboard and all, then you will be able to see some of the areas that are prone to bias or where there are any missing data. So you have some gaps and compliance risks. So a sandbox is a great space to pinpoint things that a developer could have forgotten. And then, of course, regulatory readiness. Most of the approach that we see across is as people develop solutions, and at the end is when they bring it up to sort of just check, oh, what kind of of policies apply to me. But if you bring, if such a solution has gone through a sandbox where the regulator is explaining, or the authority, when I talk about regulator, it's the same as authority, such as, the Nigeria Data Protection Office, they're able to explain to the developers what the regulations and the policies and the guidelines are for a particular solution, as also the solution providers explain to the authorities how the emerging, their solutions really work. And finally, sandboxes matter for businesses. Why? Because it's a way to experiment without endangering live systems or sensitive customer data, so that you also build that confidence, as we have already said, in trust building. It's really all related, and it's these points really that bring about quality assurance, which is of interest when it comes to AI-driven solutions. So I want to now get deeper into some of the examples, or at least into a few elements, examples. I mean, I don't think I'll explain everything. I don't know if someone is trying to say something. I'll take questions at the end. Okay.
Yeah, sure, you can continue. Yeah, we are going to receive all the questions at the end of your presentation. Please go ahead, continue.
Okay, so as most of you know, of course, the EU AI Act mandates member states to establish at least one AI regulatory sandbox. And this is how they define the AI regulatory sandboxes, as under the EU AI Act. So it's a controlled environment for innovation, facilitating the development, training, regulatory testing, and validation of innovative AI systems before they are placed on the market. So keep this title in mind, or definition in mind, as we look at the first case of as the first case study of sandboxes for AI. So the Dutch Data Protection Authority AI sandbox has been set up to provide, or is being set up to provide, supervised testing environment for AI system, and it's under the European AI Act, as I have already said. So to take you a little bit into some of the attributes, it's a collaboration between various supervisory authorities and ministries. And that's an attribute that you will find out a lot with sandboxes, where you find solutions that have been developed, say, for example, for one service, even if it's like a fintech solution, but cuts across probably not just fintech. It deals with personal data, but maybe that same payment can be used for healthcare services. And so you realize there are different regulators or authorities that would be interested in knowing that this works fine and doesn't collect any person's data. Maybe when someone is making a healthcare service payment, none of their data goes with, say, that transaction, something like that. So you realize in that case, you need the Data Protection Authority, you need the finance regulating authority, but maybe you need also the oversight of the Ministry of Health. So that's where then the approach of having a multi-stakeholder-led sandbox comes in, and that's something that is coming out a lot within the EU AI Act. Why? Because some of these sandboxes are actually really working across sectors. So it is regulatory in nature. It is at this particular one is at the national level, run by the Dutch supervisory authorities, and its focus is on artificial intelligence. But I want to just get a little into the advantages, or at least what it's able to provide to the people. So for providers or developers, or what I have been calling solution providers, the sandbox aims to help them gain greater guidance in the interpretation of the AI Act to enhance clarity. Because sometimes these acts are passed, but then the people who are developing AI solutions don't even understand what applies to them and what doesn't. But then for supervisors, now that's the authorities, it helps them to gain better insights and understanding of the opportunities, emerging risks, and the impacts of the AI use. But generally, it's also aims to improve legal certainty, innovation, and better regulation, and the development of good practices when it comes to AI use. And finally, it's an opportunity for cross-sectoral coordination among supervisory authorities. As I've given an example at the start, different authorities are coming together, sort of come up with a way of centrally handling regulatory queries. So you will notice that I'm presenting this in a way of this is in future, because there has been a study that has already been done, and this sandbox is meant to be rolled out, I think, sometime next year, early next year. So if you look it up, you'll be able to see it's yet to be launched, but it has already been set up in a way that this is what it's aimed to achieve. And this is how it's going to support the AI ecosystem to achieve, again, the same issues that we're talking about: fairness, accountability, and responsibility. Now, I want to present a different type of sandbox. The other one was a regulatory sandbox. Meta AI sandbox, for it, is an operational sandbox, and it is a testing playground for early versions of new tools and features, including generative AI-powered ad tools. The goal of this sandbox is to learn what works for advertisers and make these features easy to use in Meta's ad tools. Now, this might not look like one that is very applicable, especially for that topic, but you notice that probably what Meta is trying to achieve with this, from my understanding at least, I know one of the elements could be that advertisers, people who are marketing their tools on Meta platforms, could benefit, first of all, from having already pre-hosted data that takes their initial message, just like you get your message that you've drafted and put it in ChatGPT and ask it to sort of maybe review and refine. With this sandbox, it already has different variations of, if it's images, if it's different ways of saying text, if it's the same text but in different ways for different audiences. So it's hosting lots of data that can help marketers adjust their message to different audiences, times, and all that. So the sandbox becomes more of a tool that helps, first of all, Meta to make sure that some of these messages that advertisers are using are standardized, because if they are already providing features that are just replicating the same things over and over again, the tools are getting smarter. So there's a level of AI quality assurance that is also happening there. So it's operational in nature, as I've said. It's global, and it focuses on AI ad tools. And for it, the advantages really is it allows advertisers to find a suite of tools designed to streamline and enhance their creation process. But I also believe it helps Meta achieve that level of standardization so that the ads are not very diverging, and then creates different versions of the same ad copy. So this is how it helps to streamline and enhance their creative process. First of all, I talked about, say, creating different versions of the same copy, then experimenting with diverse visual representations to adjust visuals for different formats, be it for social posts, stories, and short videos. So again, bringing this back to the point that we are at today, why sandboxes matter so much, first of all, is it helps an organization, a business, to, first of all, say, achieve standardization, but then it also gives Meta oversight on how different users actually using their ad tools, and then they're able to refine and improve, which speaks to the services that are being provided. So what are some of the key insights from the AI Sandboxes report? You will notice that these examples that I've shared, in the report, we don't get much into each case study of the sandbox, but we list a lot more sandboxes, where they are, what they are being used for, and all that. So if you're interested, really go much into it. But some of the insights that we picked, just putting together the AI sandboxes for AI report is the use of sandboxes for AI is really expanding, and cross-border and cross-sectoral collaborations are still underdeveloped. Yes, yet as we have seen, AI-driven solutions are really cutting across different sectors, be it in the data that feeds them or even in the uses that people are using them for. And then different types of AI sandboxes serve distinct purposes. So there is no one size fits all when it comes to AI sandboxes. Depending on the authority or the regulator, they have different distinct purposes, depending on the business and what they are interested in. As we have seen, Meta is only interested in improving their ad tools for the marketing teams, because maybe they have their reasons for doing that. Another organization, another company could be interested in using sandboxes to check, to do quality assurance of the services and, the code and the software is being used. And overall, we learned that transparency, trust, and inclusivity are critical for success when it comes to AI-driven solutions. Finally, as I close, and please stop me if I'm taking a lot of time and won't leave some for questions. But as I close, I wanted to just give a glimpse of, if you're here today and you're wondering, okay, when do I start to sandbox? How do I start to sandbox? I feel like we've already spoken a lot about the why. I have a few slides for you. So again, this is more of like a recap on the why, but looking at other types of stakeholders, because I only looked at the why for businesses. But for regulators, it would help to address the need for more responsiveness and agility. As I mentioned, initially, regulations are sort of were done in a linear way, but we realize that emerging technologies are really evolving and they are iterative and they are evolving at a speed that regulations need to catch up. So sandboxes help to bring in that agility and responsiveness, but also cross-sectoral and cross-border challenges are better addressed in a sandbox environment, or at least as one of the tools. I'm not saying sandboxes are the only ways in which such challenges can be addressed. For private sector, which would be, again, like businesses, as we said, sandboxes provide an opportunity to engage directly with regulators so that you don't wait at a point where your solution has breached some regulatory or policy guideline, and that's when you're going to interface with regulators. With sandboxes, you start interfacing with regulators early on in testing phase before you roll out, but also to access to a pool of data and a safe space to test, which is like a case for the Meta sandbox that I talked about. And finally, for civil society organizations, these are the ones who are interested in making sure that some of these AI-driven solutions are accountable, are fair, and not really being harmful to the people, but also the environment. So there are mechanisms for broader societal engagement, but also surfacing public concerns and integrating them into AI governance frameworks. So when does one create a sandbox? Be it a business, be it a regulator. A sandbox can be set up before regulation, during regulation, or for testing a regulation. And this applies largely to regulatory sandboxes, which by now you understand. So before the regulation, you're able to set up a sandbox that helps you identify gaps in existing legislation and highlight areas where updates or new laws may be needed. As we know, some of the uses of AI are really new that they're not covered, say, for example, in most of what Africa's AI acts, not AI, rather data acts or data strategies or cybersecurity laws, which is what we have a lot, and data protection laws are not covering. So you will find that some of the ways and uses of AI are not catered for in some of the laws that we already have. So in that case, having a sandbox, even before the regulation, helps to identify those areas that need to now be addressed, say by a law or policy that is specifically speaking to AI-driven solutions. But when a country or an organization is already in the process of, say, developing a regulation, then sandboxing helps to draw from different sandbox models, insights drawn from various sandbox models can offer valuable guidance providing a framework for balancing innovation with ethical and legal considerations. So it enhances the process of coming up with a regulation. And where there's already a regulation in place, say like a data protection regulation, then it helps provide, sandboxes help provide a controlled testing environment in which innovators and regulators work together to identify risks and ensure compliance with the regulation. And finally, how are sandboxes set up? So sandboxes, the way we approach them at the DataSphere Initiative, it's a 5-phased approach that starts with sandbox initiation, where you're laying ground for securing stakeholder buy-in, because as you will notice, sandboxes have to be hosted by an authority, and then also you have to identify what stakeholders are supposed to engage in this sandbox, what are the relevant policies, what resources will be needed. Then you get into the sandbox planning phase, which now you're setting up a plan, really, a strategy for doing the sandbox. Then sandbox execution is where now you're putting the plan into action, putting up calls for participation for people to apply to get into the sandbox, doing evaluating, or rather reviewing applications and selecting which people to get into a sandbox. And then there is a stage of communication and engagement where you're strategizing, or at least acting on things you planned to do in order to keep an open communication, to get feedback, not only just from the participants, but also from the public, but also to disseminate findings to ensure transparency. One of the areas that we found as we're doing the Africa Outlook report is that most people who are sandboxing were not communicating much about the learnings, about, lessons learned, but also about the outcomes and impact of the sandbox. And these are some of the things that other people who are sandboxing need to learn from. And finally, closure and evaluation, where now you're looking at checking what has been the impact of this sandbox, and then working out an exit strategy, and then preparing, say, for the next cohort, where sandboxes are cohort based. So in a nutshell, this is just the approach to sandboxing, and it applies for authorities, for organizations, and all. So I will end by just highlighting a few of the services that we provide as the DataSphere Initiative, and they fall under 3 broad categories. One on learning, where we do capacity building and coaching, and sandbox, those different activities that we do, but also exploration sessions, really, which are hands-on co-creation labs, or just brainstorming sessions that are aimed to identifying
Hi,
scope.
Maureen. Sorry to cut you short. You have less than a minute. Yep.
Okay, then I'll stop here and just get questions, if people have questions, that we allow people to at least ask.
Okay. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was amazing. That was a very powerful presentation. And I'm very sure our learners will agree with me that Maureen has actually done justice to the topic of AI assurance, skills and tools for accountability. Please, can we give Maureen a round of applause, a virtual round of applause, please? Let us appreciate her for taking her time to prepare this for us and to introduce us to what Sandbox is. Please let us appreciate Maureen for that wonderful presentation. And now we are going to move on to question and answer. Please, if you have any question for our speaker and you would like to speak up, please kindly raise up your digital hand. And if you don't want to speak, you can as well put the question in the chat. Rex, please. Yeah, you can come on.
Hi, Maury. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, and it's insightful. I've had the opportunity to hear how sandboxes operate, but my question is that, the way technology and AI solutions are at every time coming up, and sometimes how do we get people, or let's say inventors or developers, to come into the sandbox before they decide to roll out their products? Because often than not, you would find out that their technologies are out, and when their technologies are now out, then that is when we begin to look at it and review whether or not it has pros and cons to every economy. So, in an ideal situation, how do we get developers and, let's say, techies to come to the sandbox before they release their products?
Thank you for that question. That's actually a great question. So one thing we need to know for our African ecosystem, and that's part of what we are trying to change under the Africa Sandboxes Forum, is not every regulator, for example, or authority has set up a sandbox where users can come. So I talked about one example of the Kenya Communication Authority's sandbox that is open to all emerging technologies. But in the context of Africa, we are looking for opportunities where it's not just a national sandbox, but we have a regional sandbox where, say, for example, for the health sector, if anyone is coming up with any AI-driven health solution, there is a sandbox at a regional level that they can come into to test or at least experiment with the regulations that apply to different either regional bodies like the Africa CDC, Center for Disease Control, or even any other regional level guidelines that are supposed to be there. But to answer the question of how people can get into a sandbox, usually what happens when sandboxes are set up, they are advertised like to developers. So their adverts put out just like they put out ads for to apply for a grant or to apply for, you know, whatever. Even sandboxes work like that. So usually these are publicized and really shared with different on the website of the authorities, maybe on social media, so that people get to know that there is this sandbox and then they apply into this sandbox. Like I said, some are cohort based. So you'll find that some it's open for a short period of time and it closes. Then the authority first deals with the solutions that have made it to that cohort. Sometimes people don't get the cut into the sandbox because there are also requirements to get into the sandbox. Your solution has to be to a particular level, and maybe your solution has to meet also what the authority is interested in testing. I've looked at sandboxes in Africa which have been cohort-based, focusing on topics. So in one cohort, they say we only want crypto-driven solutions to be tested in this cohort. Then maybe in the next cohort, after 6 months, it's aiming for any other, technologies. But what happens is sandboxes are advertised by the authority that has set them up, but also it's on the really it helps if entrepreneurs and solution providers look out for opportunities to test some of these things even when they are not advertised, so that you're looking out for ways to say, okay, if I can't get into an African-based sandbox because maybe there are few, is there any global sandbox that I could get into and see what I can test there? Maybe that adds to credibility. But to answer your question simply is how these sandboxes are set up by authorities, and so they will be advertised for solution providers to apply to get into. Those are the regulatory sandboxes at national or regional level. But like I said, organizations also companies can set up their own sandboxes to test different elements of solutions that they are developing. So they can have an internal small scale sandbox as well. I think that answers your question. Someone had a question in the chat.
Exactly. That is Ruth. Ruth
How
is
can
asking, how can we start with sandboxes and how do we make payments? Yeah, please take the question.
So we do capacity building for sandboxes as the DataSphere initiative, but this capacity building comes in different ways. Sometimes it will be workshops, and we'll advertise those as well, and usually they're applying for. But we also have a summer school, and I don't know if my colleague Rispa managed to join, but if she's here, she could share something in the chat. We usually host sandbox summer schools, week-long training on everything to do with sandboxing. But if you just want to learn a little bit more about sandboxes, I can also share a 5-minute intro to sandboxes. Ideally, the programs, the workshops, the trainings, and capacity building that we do is under the Africa Sandboxes Forum. the project that my colleague and I really lead. And usually what happens is we'll advertise if there's a capacity building activity that happens. But right now there's none open, but we have an online course. Yes, before I forget, we have an online course about sandboxes that, oh, Rispa is actually here. Thank you very much, Rispa. That Rispa can also share an online course on sandboxes that someone can also take if they're interested in taking. So I guess what I can say is keep checking on our website, follow us on LinkedIn. We always advertise, especially trainings which are open. Some are paid for, but you can also join the forums, the Africa Sandboxes Forum or the Global Sandboxes Forum, and be a part of the conversation. Because what's happening is different regulators have recognized the importance of sandboxes, and so they are trying to build now the capacity to be able to set up sandboxes. So don't be surprised if soon we are hearing almost every African country has set up a sandbox that is not by a fintech, a finance institution, because most of the examples in Africa are in banks. But now we're looking for sandboxes to work for health, for AI, for data protection and all. And that's where regulators are going. I hope that answers your question.